Black Maid slept on the floor with the twins. The millionaire saw it, and then what happened? The Whitmore mansion was silent except for the soft hum of the heating system. Outside, the wind rattled against the tall windows, but inside the air was warm, too warm for Grace, who had been on her feet for 14 straight hours. She adjusted her teal maid's uniform and rubbed her forearm through the yellow cleaning gloves. The skin beneath stung where the bruise from earlier was beginning to darken. She had learned to keep her head down, to swallow her words when the tone in the house turned sharp. But tonight was different. The twins lay on a thin white blanket on the carpet, dressed in identical light blue onesies. They were barely 3 months old, too small, too fragile for a home this cold in spirit. Grace knelt beside them, watching their chests rise and fall in sync. When she'd started the job 6 months ago, she had been told her duties were strictly housekeeping, but the truth revealed itself within a week. The hired nannies didn't last, and whenever one quit, no replacement came. It was easier for the Whites to expect Grace to fill in than to actually hire someone new. Their mother had been gone for just 3 months, lost during childbirth, leaving behind 2 tiny lives who had never known her touch. The staff spoke of her softly, almost reverently, as if raising their voices might disturb her memory. Their father, Elliot Whitmore, was the kind of man whose voice could fill a boardroom and whose name could move markets. But when it came to his children, he was a shadow. Earlier that evening, the twins had cried for nearly an hour. Grace had tried everything, bottles rocking, humming softly in her native tongue. One was feverish, his tiny fists clenching in discomfort, while the other wailed until his voice was. By the time they settled, Grace's back ached and her arms trembled from holding them. The living room lamp cast a golden glow across the carpet. Grace didn't dare put the babies in their nursery. The air in there was cold and the crib mattresses too firm. So she stayed with them where it was warmest, lying down on the carpet so they wouldn't be alone. Her head rested lightly on her arm just inches from the boys. She could feel their warmth, hear the faint sound of their breaths. Exhaustion pulled at her, but she forced herself to stay alert. If they stirred, she would know instantly. Her thoughts drifted to the muffled shouting she'd heard from upstairs earlier. The slam of a door, heavy footsteps pacing. This house had a way of consuming warmth, replacing it with an ever-present tension that seeped into every room. Grace couldn't help but worry about what kind of effect it would have on the twins as they grew up in it. She had worked in countless homes before, but something about these 2 children sparked a fierce, protective instinct in her. She couldn't quite explain it. Maybe it was the way they clung to her when she picked them up, or how their cries seemed to calm when she whispered softly to them. They had no one else to turn to. She couldn't afford to fail them. But still, her body was betraying her. Hours of cleaning, caring for them, and skipping meals had drained her. Her eyelids were growing heavier with each passing moment. She told herself she would just close them for a brief second, long enough to gather her strength. The house was too quiet to warn her. The front door opened with barely a sound, and the footsteps that followed were deliberate and quick. Elliot appeared in the doorway of the living room, his navy suit pristine, a sharp red tie against his white shirt. A briefcase hung loosely from one hand, his other still resting on the door handle. His eyes froze on the scene in front of him. His maid sprawled on the floor next to his children, the twins asleep on the carpet with their flushed cheeks pressed together. One of her gloved hands rested protectively over the edge of their blanket. And then his gaze shifted, noticing the faint bruise blossoming on her cheek. His voice sliced through the stillness. "What is going on here?" Grace's eyes snapped open. Her heart rate spiked as she quickly sat up, glancing between him and the twins. One of the babies let out a soft whimper. "I asked you a question." Elliot's voice was sharper now as he moved further into the room. "Why are my children on the floor? And why are you lying there like—" His words trailed off as he noticed her bruise. "What happened to your face?" Grace opened her mouth to speak, but the words tangled in her throat. "They were crying," she managed, her voice hoarse. "No one came. They needed—" "We have a nanny for that," he interrupted, his tone cold. No, Grace said, her voice quiet but unwavering as she met his eyes. They don't. It's just me, Grace said, her voice steady but carrying the weight of truth. For a moment something flickered in Elliot's expression, but his voice remained cold. We'll talk in my office. Now. Grace glanced down at the twins, her heart tightening. She had no idea that this conversation would be the moment everything, the real reason these children had been left in her care, and the truth behind her bruises, would finally be exposed. Slowly, Grace stood up, her legs stiff from hours of kneeling by the carpet. Elliot's eyes never left her, watching her every move as she stepped away from the babies, careful not to wake them. She could still feel their warmth lingering on her skin, a reminder of why she hadn't left their side. When they reached the office, the door clicked shut behind them. A low fire in the corner cast a flickering orange glow over Elliot's face, deepening the suspicion already etched across it. "Explain," he demanded, dropping his briefcase onto the desk with a heavy thud. Grace inhaled sharply, her hands trembling slightly. She looked at him, her voice shaking but firm. "The twins. They've had no proper care for weeks. The last nanny quit and no one replaced her. I cook, I clean, and I watch over them because no one else will. Today, one of them had a fever. I couldn't leave him in that cold nursery, so I stayed with them in the warmest place I could find." His jaw tightened, but his gaze didn't soften. "That still doesn't explain why you were lying there." She met his eyes, steady despite the tremor in her chest. "Because I was exhausted. I've been working since dawn, and I haven't eaten since breakfast. They finally stopped crying, and I didn't mean to fall asleep, but I would do it again if it meant they felt safe." His expression shifted, the anger now giving way to something heavier, something darker. "And the bruise?" he asked. Grace instinctively touched her cheek. "One of your guests," she murmured. "Last week during the party, I was carrying a tray near the hall. He said I was in the way and shoved me. I fell. No one noticed. Or maybe they did, but no one cared." Elliot leaned back in his chair, gripping the edge of the desk. His mind went back to that night. The laughter, the champagne, the constant parade of guests through the house. He had been upstairs handling a deal on the phone and hadn't seen a thing. Or maybe he hadn't bothered to notice. "You should have told me," he muttered. Grace's voice cracked, a surge of emotion she'd been holding back breaking through. "Would it have mattered? You don't even see them, Mr. Whitmore. You don't see your sons. All they have is me. And even I'm nothing here. I'm just the help." The silence between them stretched out, heavy with unspoken truths. Elliot turned towards the window, the firelight casting fleeting shadows across his face. His mind raced with memories. His late wife, the first cries of the twins, and all the days he had buried himself in work to avoid the emptiness her absence had left in him. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "Stay here," he said, and left the office abruptly. Grace stood frozen, unsure of his intentions. Moments later, she heard his footsteps approaching again. He returned with 2 small blue blankets from the nursery. Without saying a word, he draped them gently over the twins, tucking the edges carefully around their tiny forms. Grace watched from the doorway, taken aback. This was the first time she had ever seen him kneel beside them. "There," he murmured, his voice low. "Smaller than I remember." His hand hovered over their heads, uncertain, as though afraid to touch them. Grace took a step forward, her voice soft but steady. "They need you, not just your name on their birth certificates." Elliot met her gaze, and for a brief moment, the weight of everything he had missed was clear in his eyes. "I've been a coward," he admitted quietly. "I thought if I stayed busy I wouldn't have to feel the loss, but it's cost them more than I realized." When he stood up, his tone had shifted, no longer sharp, but calm and resolved. "From now on, things will be different. You won't clean another floor in this house unless you choose to. You'll be their caregiver, officially, and you'll be compensated for it." He paused, his gaze hardening. "And that man who laid a hand on you? He'll never set foot in this house again." Grace's chest tightened, and she asked quietly, "Why?" "Because you protected my children when I didn't. And I'm not going to fail them, or you, again. The days that followed felt different. Elliot started being present at breakfast, reading to the twins before heading off to work. Grace found herself laughing more with them, not out of duty, but because she genuinely enjoyed their company. The house no longer felt like a cold, lifeless place. It felt like a home. One rainy afternoon, Grace sat on the sofa, each twin nestled in her arms. Elliot came home early, his suit jacket draped over one shoulder. He paused in the doorway, his eyes lighting up at the sight of the three of them. "Room for one more?" he asked with a smile. She nodded, and he sat down beside her, pulling the boys onto his lap. Grace leaned back, finally allowing herself to relax for the first time in months. For the twins, the memory of the cold, lonely days would eventually fade. But for Elliot and Grace, the lesson would remain clear. Family isn't about titles or roles. It's about who's there when it truly matters. That night, for the first time, all four of them slept in the same room, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more emotional, dramatic, and unexpected tales. And let us know in the comments where in the world are you watching from. We love hearing from all of you. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and keep watching.